So let us now turn to Tehillim, Perek Aleph, the first Mizmor in Sefer Tehillim. Ashereh haish, asher lo halach ba'asat rishayim, u'derech ha'to'im lo'ama, u'musav l'tzloim lo'ashov. כי אם בתורת אדוני חפצו ובתורתו יגע יומם ולילה והיה כעץ שתול על ערבי מים אשר פריו ייתן בעיתו ועליהו לא ייבול וכל אשר יעשה יצליח לא כן הרשעים כי אם כמוס אשר תדפנו רוח על כן לא יקומו רשעים במשפט והטועים בעדת צדיקים כי יודע אדוני דרך צדיקים ודרך רשעים טובים. This is a short mizmor, 6 pesukim. Ostensibly, at first glance, really quite straightforward. Basically says there are good people in the world and there are bad people. There are tzaddikim and there are rashaim, and Hashem likes the tzaddikim. That's, you could more or less sum it up like that if you wish. But the truth is that if you were to look at it that way, you would be missing most of what the Mizmor actually says. To understand Tanakh in general and to understand Sefer Tehillim in particular, perhaps, is a very great challenge. So let us begin at the beginning. This, by the way, is a new, updated version, not the same as what you saw perhaps last time. This is more or less complete. I may make some other changes or additions, but this is more or less the near final version. The Mizmor begins by saying, Ashereh ha'ish asher lo halach ba'asat rishayim. The verb halach, lichora, is in the past tense. So you would think you should translate it as happy and blessed is the man who has not in the past walked ba'asat rishayim, or followed in the path of the rishayim. But that would be incorrect. Because in the language of the Tanakh, the tenses of the verbs are very fluid. Very often, when describing an ongoing present reality, something that's continuously so, very often the future tense is used, and sometimes the past tense is used. But it means who does not habitually do something. So Ashereh ha'ish asher lo halach ba'asat rishayim doesn't mean who didn't go in the past. It means that is not his way, that is not his custom. So in the Perush I wrote she'eno holech in the present tense. Interestingly, if you look in the King James Version, which happens to be a stunningly authentic translation almost invariably, that's exactly how they translate it in the present tense, as it should be. It's also the case in the Syriac translation. Interesting.
Did Shlomo translate it that way?
I don't know. Not sure. They did translate it. Anyway. Ashereh ha'ish asher lo halach ba'asat rishayim. So, happy, blessed, and successful will be the man who does not walk, who does not follow ba'asat rishayim. The word ba'asat means, as I wrote here, b'shitaf. He doesn't follow doesn't follow their ideology, which, as you may realize, has everything to do with what we were discussing till this point this evening. It does not follow doesn't feel obligated, and does not walk along that path according to that ideology. The word isa can sometimes mean a suggestion or advice. It could also mean a thought, in other words, a system of thought, an ideology. Ba'asat rishayim. The word ideology, ideologia, didn't exist in the Tanakh. So Ba'asat Risha'im means who does not follow the ideology of the Risha'im. Now, who are these Risha'im? Again, I will point out that the King James Version translates, I think, an excellent translation. The Risha'im, they translate as the ungodly. It's a very good translation. It's excellent. What we find in the Perush of Rabbi Yosef Ya'abetz is he says, Hem haminim ha'okrim et hakol, ki omrim en Adonai ro'eh othanu, azav Adonai et ha'aretz. That is a pasuk in Yehezkel, Perek Het. In other words, the Risha'im are those who say, there's no God, or if there is, he doesn't see or doesn't care what we do. So, practically speaking, he's not here. We can ignore, we can forget about such a thing. That's not relevant. And that's exactly ungodly. In other words, a person who lives as if there's no God. And we see that this is not a fanciful interpretation of Rabbi Yosef Ya'abdes, who was from the generation of the Spanish expulsion. We see it's mefurash. It's explicitly written so in Tehillim, in Perek Yod Gimel, chapter 13 of Tehillim. There we find the following pesukim. Perek Yod, chapter 10. There, and this is what I quote here. V'chen omer, ki hilel rasha al ta'avat nafsho, uvosea berech ni'es Adonai. He disdains her. He has disdain for Hashem. And what does he say? Rasha kirova apo bar yidrosh. He is very haughty. He knows everything. En Elohim kol mezimotav. He plans and does and acts in a way that clearly indicates that there's no God. And he says, Omar belibo, he says in his heart, Shachach el, God has forgotten, or he doesn't care. He stir pano bal ra'al nesach. He looks away, he doesn't know what goes on, he doesn't care. Alma ni'es rasha Elohim, Omar belibo, lot yidrosh. In other words, these Risha'im, according to this is a Mefurash Pasuk. So the Pasuk is talking about Risha'im, and it defines their attitude, their ideology. The ideology is, there's no God, or well, yeah, philosophically, the Greek philosophers had to agree there must be some primal cause or something, but he's much too busy elsewhere to be concerned with what we do or don't do. So practically, there's no God. The Radak adds, "Harashaim hem aharedim niknot mamon v'ta'awaf libam ba'olam." Now, what do people? Now, people who have no God, what do they aspire to? What are you going to do with yourself? Well, either you can play some inane computer game, or watch TikTok, or you can take drugs, right? That's what a lot of people do.
Just all into themselves.
Sorry?
They're just all into themselves.
Yeah. Or you can try and satisfy your most base desires constantly. And one of those desires is money, wealth, material, the acquisition of wealth and material goods, correct? So the Radak writes, "Harashaim aharedim liknot mamon." Their main drive in the world, what drives them is to amass wealth. And because they don't believe in a God, or they don't think he cares, they don't distinguish between good and right and wrong. And they will steal and kill because of this desire for money. There is actually a greater yetzer than money, which I'll discuss in a moment. And so it says in the Pasuk, Adonai Tzadik Yivhan, V'Rasha V'Ohev Hamas Sana Nafsho. Hashem. What is the Rasha? The person he's described in this Pasuk in Tehillim, Perek Yud Aleph, 11. He's called the Rasha, and he's called the Ohev Habas, a person who delights in illegally and unjustly appropriating wealth to himself. So we see that Psukim and Tehillim themselves define for us very clearly what a Rasha is. A Rasha is a person who is out for himself, whatever it is that presses his buttons, whatever gets him excited, that's what he goes for, and he has no moral compass and no conscience at all. And this is based on a hashkafa. Harasha'im mezidim mitoch hashkafa shel kefira ufrikat or. This is their ideology. It's not that, well, we know there's a God, but, we want to do this because we just do, so we'll do it anyhow. No, this is their ideology is there's no God. People who believe in that are just primitive idiots. They're fools. There's nothing to talk about with these people. That's, by the way, how the hard left who are destroying the country at the present time, how they view us. We're just primitive numbskulls who don't understand anything. And they're enlightened, modern, erudite individuals, and they know that there's no God. So what drives them and what directs them in life is their desires, their yetzer hara. And there is another yetzer which is very powerful, which is even more powerful than that, and that is hayetzer limshol v'lishlot gadol mikulam. You familiar with the novel 1984 by George Orwell?
Yeah.
What's the name? 1984.
You remember the interrogation of what's his name, Winston, by O'Brien, I think his name was, the one of the big wigs in the party. That was the fictional, or not so fictional, totalitarian party that was running the UK, what was Britain once upon a time, according to this book. So Winston Smith, I believe his name is, as I recall, he asks O'Brien, he says, I understand how you control the masses, how you do all these things, but I'm not sure I understand why you do it. What is that you actually want? And this man O'Brien, one of the big wigs in the totalitarian state, he says, power. It's all about power. Bill Gates has enough money, right? I mean, I don't know how many billions, but it's 50, 200, I don't know, I lost count. But enough money to get by, shall we say, for the next few years at least. And you can't eat dinner twice, so once you've eaten dinner, you're full, so you're not going to eat till tomorrow morning, correct? So what are you going to do with all this money? So what he does with his money, for example, is he procures for himself more and more power and control. For whatever it is that he believes in or likes, whatever idea appeals to him. And the same is true, of course, of many others. But he's a good example. That's why Bill Gates, I believe it's something like 50% of the WHO's, the World Health Organization's budget, he provides it. Or he's the second largest donor after the US government, or something like that. And therefore it might not surprise you that he controls the policies and decisions of the WHO.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not surprise you that he is heavily invested in the Pfizer-BioNTech inoculation.
Mm-hmm.
And it may not surprise you that 3 years ago, and 2.5 years ago, and 2 years ago, he was telling us that these shots are perfectly safe and very effective. And now that we all know that it's not so, and now that he sold his stocks in that company, which he has, we'll look this up, I'm not making it up. So now he says, well, actually, they're not very effective, and we're going to have to do something better next time. So, all right. So, it's all part of a bigger plan, but that's another discussion. But the desire to control and decide what will happen in the world is a tremendous vice. All right. So who was so this person? We said Ashareha Isha Shalaha Halach Ba'asat Rishayim Uvdarach Hattaim Lo Amad. The word derech doesn't mean a path, doesn't mean a road that you follow. It means the minhag, that was the practice, the lifestyle of the hatta'im. Hatta'im are people who habitually sin. Now, why? Who habitually sins? Again, people who don't believe in a God, and people who are interested only in satisfying their ta'awot, their desires. And therefore, sinning is in their eyes perfectly acceptable. Lo amad did not stand. In other words, does not stand. He doesn't. This is explained by the Radak and others, meaning that he, a person who keeps away from such people, doesn't want to have nothing to do with them about such a thing. You say lo amad. He didn't even stand near them. He didn't just sit down with them. He didn't even stand. He wasn't even with them temporarily. He keeps far away from such people. Uv moshav leslim lo yashav. Now the word lesim is needs to be understood. First of all, I should point out that we have here these three types mentioned here: Rashaim, Hatta'im, and Lesim. Many Mefarshim explain that these are three different kinds of people. That the Rashaim are the more ideologically motivated Rashaim, and the Hatta'im are simply those who just follow the Yetzer Hara, who just give in to temptation. And the Lesim are scoffers. In other words, they're people who just sit around in cafes and shmooze and talk Lashon Hara. That's Lesim. There are many Mefarshim who explain it that way. Aval l'aniyuth da'athi is a lokach. In my humble opinion, that's not the case. I think the Rashaim and the Hatta'im and the Lesim are all the same people. And one proof, simple proof of what I'm saying, you will find if you look in Pasuk Hey on page 5.
Page 5.
Bottom of page 5, so the bottom of the last Pasuk. Al Ken, it says, Lo yaqumu Rashaim b'mishpat, wa hatta'im ba'da tzadikim. The Pasuk is comparing and speaking of them in the same breath. And they're mentioned together because there's no real difference between them. So we're not talking about, and it's also the case that many Mefarshim in fact say that the Rashaim are worse than the Hatta'im and the Hatta'im are worse than the Lesim. The Lesim are just sort of lightweight Rashaim. Lightweight, they're just, silly people who do nothing with their lives and they just shoot the breeze and talk about, Narishkeit, Yiddish, empty nothingness. Or they talk Lashon Hara, that's what they do. But they're not terrible people, they're just not very good people. They don't study Torah, they're not, whatever. That's actually, I don't think, correct. I think the correct Pirush is that the Lesim are the worst of the lot. And I have proof for this, and I'll try and explain now. I know that it's also getting late, so if we need to stop perhaps in a few minutes, we will, and we'll continue next time. So we'll just finish this pasuk perhaps. So, Moshav Lesim, I write here, the less is the opposite of the Chacham and Tzaddik. And the pasuk says so explicitly in Sefer Mishlei, Perek Kaf Aleph, pasuk Kaf Dalet, 21-24. It says, Zed Yohir Les Shemo Oseh Be'evrat Zadon. In other words, the Les is not some lightweight idiot who just does a lot of shtuyot. No, the Zed is a very serious, deliberate person who deliberately does the wrong thing, and he's referred to in the pasuk as the Les. And another pasuk says, Zimath Iwelet Hattath Wathu'avat Lo Adam Les. In other words, this is a guy who's completely evil. This pasuk implies. And therefore you cannot rebuke him, you cannot tell him off. It says Mefurash in the pasuk in Mishlei Perek Tet. It says Al tochach les pen yisno'eka. Do not rebuke, do not chastise the less, because he will hate you. Hochach lo hacham. But if you rebuke and chastise and explain to a chacham that he's doing where he's going wrong, he will love you, he will thank you. So what do you see? This pasuk is juxtaposing or showing that these are two extremes. Les and Chacham are two opposites. So the Lesim, the only what is special about the Lesim is that they don't just do evil. They speak evil, and they like speaking, and they like ridiculing everything. They're cynical about everything. But they're no different from the Rashaim. They're worse. The pasuk is very explicit. It says, Zed Yahir Les Shemo. If he's Yahir, which means he's haughty, he has no humility about him at all, that's a less. He will speak about anything, will say anything against anybody, he will lie all the time, habitually. That's a less. So the righteous man doesn't have anything to do with such people. Lo yashav klal. In other words, keeps far away from such people at all times. And we'll end with the following. It states in the Mishnah, Masechet Avot, is on page 4. The Mishnah states in Masechet Avot Perek Gimel, Rabbi Hanania ben Tardion Omer, Shenaim shayu yoshavim, two Jews were sitting together at the table. Ve'en benehem divrei Torah, but there's no words of Torah exchanged between them. Hareze moshav lesim, that is a moshav lesim, that is a gathering of lesim. Of moshav lesim lo yashav. V'chatav Rambam writes his perush on this Mishnah. Riyatho shemoshav lesim nikra kol moshav she'en medabrim bo b'ma'alach haTorah. Any gathering of people where the Torah doesn't come up in discussion at all, the proof that this is a moshav lesim is what it says, Ki im b'Torah tatunai hefso. In other words, the next pasuk says, the righteous man who does not have anything to do with such people, what does he do? What does he care for? The Torah of Hashem hefso. His desire is to be connected to the Torah of Hashem, to study it, to teach it, to hear of others teach it, explain it to him, whatever, and discuss it. כאילו אמר, לפי שהיה חפצו בתורת השם, לא ישב במושב לשים, אשר אין בו תורת השם. So a person who truly loves Torah will, who has a true yearning and thirst for Torah, will not be in such a place, will not join such people. And I quote here in footnote 6, actually 7, it talks, and this is in Masechet Avodah Zarah, the Tosefta, and the Talmud, it says, that talking in Roman times, 2,000 years ago, it says that it's asur to go to the theaters and the circuses and the arenas of the Romans, of the Goyim, mishum avodah zarah, because there was always some form of sacrifice or some kind of avodah zarah was involved in it. V'chachamim omerim, that's Rabbi Meir. Chachamim omerim, bezman shemezabachim asu mishum avodah zarah, when there is a sacrifice or some kind of idol worship involved, and it's asur to be there because of the avodah zarah. But if sometimes there's no sacrifice, asur mishum moshav lesim, it's asur to be there because it's a moshav lesim. It's a gathering of evil, frivolous, empty-headed, and people who, without doubt, are involved in doing things which are wrong. And therefore, it goes on to say, he who goes to view the plays and the circuses and the clowns, etc., talks about mukyon. The word mukyon is a word in Hebrew today. It means a clown. But the person who goes to view all these shows and what have you, the Romans used to put on to entertain the masses, right? Bread and circus, right? So, a person who's truly connected to Hashem and truly wishes to be connected to Hashem and knows that the way to do so is through the Torah will not spend a lot of time. In fact, he'll spend no time with on what have you, TikTok or watching the Grammy Awards or whatever it is. Yes, a normal Jew will not be in such a place. He won't want to be in such a place. He will flee from such a place.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.